the most dangerous lies are never shouted. They arrive dressed in silk. I didn't know those words would become the only explanation that made sense after the night my entire life unraveled. Until then, silk had only meant elegance to me. It meant museum galas, careful conversations, and donors who smiled with their mouths while measuring every person in the room with their eyes. At 27, I had spent 6 years building a reputation as someone people trusted with history. I restored paintings. I catalogued forgotten collections. I believed every object carried a memory worth protecting. That belief was the reason I accepted an invitation to the Whitmore Foundation's annual charity gala in Manhattan. I almost stayed home. My apartment was quiet, my refrigerator nearly empty, and the forecast promised cold rain after sunset. But my supervisor insisted the event would help secure funding for our next exhibition, so I slipped into the only ivory silk gown I owned, a simple dress my late mother had worn once before carefully preserving it in cedar paper. It fit as though it had been waiting for me all these years. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered warm light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly while servers carried silver trays through clusters of guests dressed in black tuxedos and designer gowns. Everywhere I looked, wealth moved with effortless confidence. I felt like someone who had accidentally wandered into another person's dream. Even so, I smiled, accepted polite introductions, and answered questions about Renaissance conservation techniques that no one genuinely wanted to hear. They wanted culture without dust. Beauty without history. Appearances without sacrifice. I wandered toward an exhibit displayed beneath protective glass in the center of the room. Inside rested an antique silk scarf embroidered with delicate gold thread, said to have belonged to a European noble family more than a century ago. It seemed strangely familiar, though I couldn't explain why. The intricate stitching reminded me of patterns my mother used to sketch while humming beside our kitchen window. Before I could linger on the thought, the ballroom lights flickered once. Then again. Conversation slowed. A security alarm chimed somewhere beyond the walls. When the lights returned only seconds later, the display case stood open. The silk scarf was gone. Silence spread through the ballroom faster than panic. Every guest looked around. Every guard reached for an earpiece. Then someone pointed directly at me. I looked down in confusion and saw a loose strand of shimmering ivory silk caught around my wrist, matching the fabric missing from the display. My heartbeat stumbled. I had never seen it before. Cameras turned. Phones appeared. Faces changed. Friendly smiles disappeared beneath suspicion. A security officer stepped toward me with careful professionalism, but before he spoke, another presence entered the room. The conversations died without anyone asking for silence. Even the musicians stopped playing. I followed everyone's gaze to a tall man crossing the marble floor with measured confidence. His charcoal suit fit perfectly. His pale blue eyes revealed nothing. People moved aside long before he reached them, as if they understood invisible rules I had never learned. He stopped a few feet away and looked first at the silk around my wrist, then directly into my eyes. For one impossible second, it felt as though he wasn't deciding whether I was guilty. It felt as though he was trying to remember where he had seen me before. The room remained perfectly still until the man finally spoke. Everyone will lower their phones. His voice was calm, almost quiet, yet every person within earshot obeyed without hesitation. I watched glowing screens disappear one by one as though someone had pulled an invisible curtain across the ballroom. The security officer standing beside me hesitated before looking toward him for approval instead of toward the museum director. That was the moment I realized this stranger carried a kind of authority that had nothing to do with the event itself. His attention returned to me, unwavering but strangely patient. "What is your name?" he asked. My throat felt dry. "Claire Bennett." He repeated it slowly, as if testing whether it belonged somewhere inside a memory he had buried years ago. "Claire Bennett," he echoed. "You work for the Ashcroft Museum." It was not a question. I nodded before I remembered I probably should not answer someone I had never met. "Yes." He glanced toward the open display case, then back to the loose strand of silk around my wrist. Did you touch the exhibit? No. My answer came immediately because it was true. I admired it from a distance. That is all. The museum director hurried toward us, his face pale beneath the ballroom lights. Mr. Romano, he said carefully, the authorities have already been contacted. Romano. The name landed with unexpected weight. I had heard it whispered before in charity circles, attached to real estate projects, international foundations, and private collections that almost never appeared in public. Adrian Romano acknowledged the director with the slightest nod before looking at the head of security. Review every camera before accusing anyone. The officer shifted uneasily. Sir, the evidence. Adrian interrupted him without raising his voice. Evidence is something you verify. Suspicion is something you manage. Do not confuse the two. No one answered. The silence became heavier than any argument. I looked down again at the silk wrapped around my wrist. It seemed impossible that something so delicate could suddenly feel heavier than iron. My hands trembled as I carefully lifted the loose fabric. I do not know how this got here, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Adrian watched every movement. Not once did his expression suggest pity. Instead, he observed me with remarkable concentration, as though the smallest detail mattered. My breathing. My hesitation. The way my fingers refused to let the silk fall onto the marble floor. If she stole it, he finally said, why is the display empty while the supposed evidence remains visible for everyone to see? The question drifted through the ballroom, unanswered. Faces that had looked certain only moments earlier suddenly became uncertain. I saw people exchanging confused glances. Someone quietly admitted that it did not make much sense. Another guest whispered that the alarm had lasted less than 10 seconds. My heart continued racing, but for the first time since the lights had flickered, I felt something unfamiliar replacing panic. It was hope. Small. Fragile. Dangerous enough that I barely trusted it. Adrian stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. His pale blue eyes settled on the silk one final time before lifting to meet mine. Miss Bennet, he said evenly, someone wanted this to be found on you. The certainty in his voice sent a chill through me because it matched the terrible realization already forming inside my own mind. I had not been chosen by accident. I had been chosen on purpose. The ballroom slowly found its voice again, but nothing sounded the same. Conversations returned in careful whispers instead of confident laughter. The quartet remained silent. Even the crystal glasses seemed too delicate to touch. Adrian Romano turned toward the head of security with the composed confidence of someone who had already made his decision. Lock every exit, he said. No one leaves until the footage is preserved exactly as it is. His tone remained measured, but no one questioned him. I stood frozen beside the empty display, trying to understand why the room had suddenly begun revolving around a man who was not even hosting the event. The museum director cleared his throat. Miss Bennet will need to remain available for questioning. Adrian looked at him for only a moment. She will. Then his eyes shifted back to me. With me. The words caught me completely off guard. I am not going anywhere with you, I replied before I could stop myself. My voice shook, but it was steady enough for everyone nearby to hear. For the first time, something resembling the faintest smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Not amusement. Respect. That is exactly why you should. I folded my arms, still clutching the loose strand of silk. You expect me to trust a stranger because everyone else seems afraid of him? No, he answered quietly. I expect you to trust your own instincts. I stared at him without speaking. Every sensible thought told me to stay exactly where I was. Yet something about the room felt wrong now. The accusing looks had not disappeared. They had only become quieter. Someone had placed that silk on me while hundreds of people filled the ballroom. Whoever had done it was still standing somewhere behind those polished smiles. Adrian glanced toward one of the towering windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Rain traced slow lines across the glass, blurring the city lights into soft streaks of gold and white. "Whoever planned this believed the accusation would end tonight," he said. "Instead, it has only begun." I felt my stomach tighten. "Why are you helping me?" He remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Because whoever chose you also chose something else." His eyes lowered briefly to the silk wrapped around my wrist. "That fabric does not belong in this collection." I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The original artifact disappeared years ago." His words barely rose above a whisper, yet they echoed louder than the alarm had moments earlier. "The one displayed tonight is a replica." My mind struggled to catch up. "Then why would anyone steal a copy?" "Exactly." He let the question hang between us. Around us, security personnel continued speaking into radios while guests gathered into anxious circles, but their voices seemed distant now. Adrian extended his hand, not demanding, simply offering. "Miss Bennett, if you stay here, everyone will continue seeing you as the woman standing beside an empty display case. If you come with me, we may discover why someone wanted that story told in the first place." I looked at his hand but did not take it. Instead, I drew a slow breath and stepped forward on my own. His hand lowered without disappointment, as though he had expected that choice all along. Together we walked across the marble floor while hundreds of eyes followed us. No one tried to stop us. No one even spoke. As the ballroom doors closed behind us, I realized I was not leaving the gala because I trusted Adrian Romano. I was leaving because somewhere inside that glittering room stood a person who already knew my name long before I had ever heard theirs. The rain greeted us the moment the hotel doors opened, washing the noise of the gala into a distant memory. A black sedan waited beneath the covered entrance, its headlights glowing softly against the wet pavement. The driver stepped out, opened the rear door, and said nothing. Adrian walked past the car without looking back. Somehow he already knew I would follow. I hesitated for only a second before climbing inside. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and fresh rain. The city slipped past the windows in blurred reflections, towers dissolving into streaks of white and amber as water streamed across the glass. Neither of us spoke for several blocks. I finally broke the silence. "You still have not told me why you know so much about that scarf." Adrian kept his eyes on the skyline outside. "Because my family commissioned the original more than 80 years ago." I frowned. "You said the one at the gala was a replica." "It was." "Then why would someone build an entire evening around stealing something that was already fake?" He folded his hands together before answering. "Sometimes people do not steal an object. They steal the story attached to it." His words settled heavily in the quiet cabin. I thought about the cameras, the accusations, the strand of silk somehow finding its way around my wrist. Someone had wanted witnesses. Someone had wanted photographs. The missing artifact had almost become secondary. "You think this was planned long before tonight?" "I know it was." I turned toward him. "Then why involve me?" Adrian finally met my eyes. There was no suspicion in his expression now, only careful observation. "That is the question I cannot answer yet." The car slowed before stopping at a red light overlooking the East River. Reflections shimmered across the water like broken glass, beautiful and impossible to hold. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a thin cream-colored envelope. He handed it to me without explanation. My name was written across the front in elegant handwriting. Claire Bennett. I stared at it in disbelief. "Where did you get this?" "It was delivered to my office yesterday morning." A chill ran through me. "Yesterday?" He nodded. "Before anyone knew you would attend the gala." My fingers suddenly felt too cold to move. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of thick stationery. There were only 2 lines written in dark blue ink. "When Silk returns home, the forgotten daughter will stand beneath the lights." There was no signature. No address. Nothing else. I read it twice before looking back at Adrian. I have never seen this before. I believe you. The certainty in his voice surprised me more than the letter itself. Then why did you not contact me yesterday? He looked out the window as the traffic light turned green. Because until tonight, I believed the message referred to someone else. My heartbeat quickened. And now? The car continued through the rain toward Midtown. Adrian answered without taking his eyes off the road ahead. Now I believe someone spent a great deal of time making sure our paths crossed exactly when they wanted them to. I lowered the letter into my lap, trying to steady my breathing. My entire life had always felt ordinary, predictable, comfortably small. Yet in less than an hour, a missing scarf, an anonymous message, and a man I had never met had transformed every certainty into another unanswered question. Outside, the rain continued falling with quiet determination, as though the city itself was trying to wash away clues that someone else desperately wanted us to find. The sedan turned beneath an iron gate that opened before we reached it, revealing an estate hidden behind rows of towering oak trees that somehow made the center of Manhattan feel impossibly far away. I stepped out into the cool night air, my shoes echoing softly across the stone driveway as rain settled into a gentle mist. The house ahead was less a mansion than a private museum, its tall windows glowing with warm light that reflected across polished limestone. Inside, everything felt deliberate. Shelves filled with rare books stretched toward high ceilings. Oil paintings lined the walls beside antique clocks that marked different time zones. Nothing seemed chosen to impress strangers. It looked like a place built by someone who respected history more than luxury. Adrian removed his jacket and placed it over the back of a chair before motioning toward a long wooden table where several folders already waited. "Sit," he said quietly. I remained standing. "You expected me." "I expected whoever received that message." He opened the first folder and slid several printed photographs across the table. They showed the ballroom from different security cameras. Every angle. Every entrance. Every hallway. I leaned closer. In one photograph I was speaking with the museum director. In another I stood alone admiring the display case. Then I noticed something strange. "Wait." I pointed toward the image. "That woman." Adrian followed my finger. A woman in a silver evening gown appeared only a few feet behind me. She seemed unremarkable at first glance until Adrian placed another photograph beside it. The same woman appeared again nearly 20 minutes later on the opposite side of the ballroom. Then again near the musicians. Then beside one of the exits. Always watching. Always alone. "She followed me," I whispered. Adrian nodded. "Without ever approaching you." My pulse quickened. "Who is she?" "We do not know yet." He turned another page. "But we know something else." A close image of the display case filled the next sheet. The replica scarf rested beneath the glass only minutes before the lights failed. Another image taken seconds after the lights returned showed the empty stand. The timestamps left less than 9 seconds between them. 9 seconds, I murmured. No one could replace the scarf, frame someone, and disappear in 9 seconds. Adrian watched my reaction carefully. Exactly. I looked back through the photographs again, searching for something everyone else had missed. My eyes stopped on a reflection in the polished marble floor beneath the display. It was faint, distorted by the lighting, but unmistakable. Someone had been standing behind the case before the lights went out. "Can you enlarge this?" I asked. Adrian immediately carried the photograph to a nearby monitor. Within seconds the reflection expanded across the screen. It remained blurry, but one detail emerged with surprising clarity. A ring. Large. Oval. Deep emerald green. Adrian grew very still. "You recognize it," I said. He did not answer immediately. His expression hardened with quiet concern rather than anger. Very few people wear that family crest. I looked at him in confusion. Your family? His silence lasted only a heartbeat, yet it was enough. I suddenly understood why he had questioned every piece of evidence instead of accepting the obvious. Whoever had planned the gala had not only framed me. They had carefully planted the first shadow of suspicion inside Adrian's own world. Adrian remained silent long after the image disappeared from the monitor. The room seemed quieter than before, the ticking of an antique clock becoming the only sound between us. I had expected denial. I had expected him to dismiss the emerald ring as coincidence. Instead, he walked to one of the tall windows overlooking the rain-soaked gardens and stood with his hands behind his back. There are only 6 emerald signet rings like that, he said at last. Each one was made by the same jeweler almost 50 years ago. I swallowed carefully. Who owns them? Members of my family. His answer landed with unsettling calm. I waited for him to explain further, but he did not. Instead, he reached for another folder resting on a nearby shelf and placed it in front of me. Inside were photographs of charity boards, museum committees, historical foundations, and cultural organizations across New York. I recognized several names from professional conferences. Others belonged to people I had only read about in magazine articles. Thin red lines connected certain photographs as though someone had been mapping relationships for months. These are all connected to your family? I asked. Adrian shook his head. To people who have done business with my family over the last 20 years. My eyes followed one line after another until I noticed something that made me pause. The Whitmore Foundation sat directly at the center of the page. Every connection eventually led back to the gala. Someone built this entire event like a stage, I whispered. Yes. Adrian nodded once. And every stage needs an audience. The realization sent another chill through me. Whoever had orchestrated everything had not wanted a simple theft. They had wanted hundreds of respected witnesses to watch me become the obvious suspect. My reputation had been destroyed before I even understood what had happened. I leaned back slowly, trying to organize thoughts that refused to stay still. If the emerald ring belongs to your family, then someone wanted you to discover it. Adrian looked at me with quiet approval. Keep going. I drew a slow breath. If they wanted to hide their involvement, they would never have allowed that reflection to appear. He smiled faintly, the first genuine expression I had seen from him all evening. Exactly. I stared at the photographs again. So the ring was not a mistake. It was an invitation. Those words echoed inside my mind. An invitation. Not just for Adrian. For both of us. Whoever planned the gala had expected him to investigate. Expected me to follow. Every answer we uncovered had been carefully positioned for us to find. Why? I asked. Because someone inside my family wants me looking in the wrong direction. Adrian spoke so quietly that I almost missed the sentence. The person behind this does not fear being discovered. They fear discovering something else. Before I could respond, a soft knock interrupted the silence. An older man entered carrying a silver tray with 2 cups of coffee and a sealed envelope. He greeted Adrian with respectful familiarity before placing the envelope on the table. This arrived 5 minutes ago, sir. No return address. Adrian thanked him and waited until the door closed. Then he carefully opened the envelope. Inside rested a single museum admission ticket dated 23 years earlier. Nothing else. I stared at the faded print across the bottom until my breath caught. Printed beneath the museum logo were 6 words I had not expected to read. Children under 5 admitted free with family. Adrian slowly turned the ticket over. Written across the back in the same elegant blue handwriting as the first letter was another message. Some memories disappear because someone worked very hard to erase them. Sleep never came that night. I sat alone in the library while the grandfather clock quietly counted every passing minute, turning silence into something almost tangible. The faded museum ticket rested on the table beside the anonymous letters, and I kept reading the same sentence over and over until the words began to lose their shape. Some memories disappear because someone worked very hard to erase them. I had always believed my childhood was ordinary. My parents rarely spoke about the years before we moved to Boston, and after my mother passed away, there was no one left to ask. The few family photographs we owned began when I was 6 years old. I had never questioned why there were so few pictures before that. It had simply become another quiet corner of my life that I never explored. Adrian entered carrying a thin leather binder. He looked no more rested than I felt. He placed the binder in front of me without speaking. Inside were copies of old museum records, charity guest lists, and newspaper clippings from more than 2 decades earlier. I searched every archive connected to that admission ticket, he said. Only one exhibition matches the date. I scanned the page. It had been a private historical exhibition sponsored jointly by the Whitmore Foundation and the Romano Cultural Trust. Attendance had been limited to invited families and donors. My parents were not wealthy, I said quietly. We would never have been invited. Adrian leaned forward, studying another document. According to this list, someone purchased 4 guest passes under the name Bennett. I frowned. 4? Your mother. Your father. You. He paused before continuing. And one additional child. My heart seemed to stop. I was an only child. Adrian slid another page toward me. It was incomplete, the ink faded with age, but one line remained readable. Family entry confirmed. 2 adults. 2 children. I stared at the words until they blurred. None of it made sense. My parents had never mentioned another child. There had never been a brother or sister. I searched my memory desperately, hoping for some forgotten birthday, some old photograph, any small detail that might explain what I was reading. Nothing came. Only an odd sensation lingered at the edge of my thoughts, like hearing a familiar melody without remembering where it belonged. Adrian noticed my expression. Do not force it, he said gently. Memory rarely returns because someone demands it. His calm voice steadied me more than I expected. For the first time since leaving the gala, I realized he had never once tried to tell me what to believe. He simply placed facts in front of me and allowed me to reach my own conclusions. That quiet respect slowly replaced the fear I had carried into his home. Before either of us spoke again, one of the monitors connected to the estate security system emitted a soft alert. Adrian turned immediately. A camera positioned outside the front gate had captured a dark sedan slowing just long enough for someone inside to leave a small package beside the entrance before driving away. No faces were visible. No license plate could be identified through the rain. Minutes later, a member of the household retrieved the package and carried it into the library. Adrian carefully untied the plain brown wrapping while I watched from across the table. Inside rested an old framed photograph protected beneath cracked glass. The image had faded almost to gray, but 4 figures stood smiling outside a museum entrance. 2 adults. 2 little girls holding hands. One of them was unmistakably me. The other child looked almost exactly like me, wearing the same smile, the same light-colored dress, and around her neck hung the very same embroidered silk scarf that had disappeared from the gala. My hands would not stop trembling as I lifted the photograph from the wrapping paper. The cracked glass reflected the soft light above the library table, making the faces appear almost alive. I studied every detail with desperate attention. My mother wore the same pearl earrings she always reserved for special occasions. My father smiled with an expression I had not seen since childhood. And beside me stood a little girl who could have been my reflection. The same pale blonde hair. The same gray-blue eyes. The same small dimple that appeared whenever we smiled. The only difference was the embroidered silk scarf resting around her shoulders. I looked at Adrian, hoping he would tell me the picture had been altered somehow. Instead, he quietly removed the backing from the old frame. Folded behind the photograph rested a yellowed museum brochure and a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but one sentence remained perfectly readable. Keep them together. They are safer that way. No signature followed. No explanation. Only those 7 words. I lowered myself into the nearest chair because my knees suddenly felt too weak to stand. I would have remembered a sister, I whispered. Would you? Adrian asked gently. There was no challenge in his voice. Only quiet curiosity. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came. My earliest memories had always felt strangely incomplete. Birthday parties without many guests. Family vacations with missing details. Entire years that existed only through scattered photographs. I had accepted those gaps because everyone forgets parts of childhood. Now those empty spaces no longer felt natural. They felt carefully arranged. Adrian opened another archive box that one of his assistants had quietly placed outside the library earlier that morning. Inside rested property records, newspaper articles, and copies of adoption filings from nearly 25 years ago. Most appeared unrelated until Adrian placed one page beside the museum photograph. My breath caught immediately. It listed the address where my parents had lived before moving to Boston. Directly beneath it appeared another document showing the same address registered 6 months later under a different surname. Someone changed your family's records, Adrian said. Not completely. Just enough to make tracing them almost impossible. I stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Why would anyone erase an ordinary family? Adrian remained thoughtful for several moments before answering. Perhaps your family was never as ordinary as you believed. The idea should have sounded impossible. Instead, it felt strangely familiar, as though a forgotten part of me had been waiting years to hear someone finally say it aloud. The morning sunlight slowly pushed through the rain clouds outside, filling the library with soft golden light. It should have felt comforting. Instead, every new answer revealed another mystery waiting beneath it. Just then Adrian's phone vibrated against the wooden table. He glanced at the screen before his expression changed almost imperceptibly. He handed the phone to me without saying a word. An anonymous email had arrived only seconds earlier. Attached was a high-resolution photograph taken inside the gala ballroom. It showed me standing beside the display case only moments before the lights failed. Hidden near the edge of the frame, reflected inside a polished silver serving tray, stood the woman in the silver gown who had followed me throughout the evening. This time her face was perfectly visible. I felt the air leave my lungs because I recognized her immediately. She had been standing beside my mother in one corner of the old museum photograph 23 years earlier, watching the 2 little girls with the same calm smile she still wore today. The photograph stayed on the screen long after I lowered the phone. I could not look away from the woman's face. 23 years had passed, yet time had barely touched her. The same graceful posture. The same composed smile. Even the silver brooch fastened near her shoulder appeared identical. It was impossible, and yet every instinct told me I was not mistaken. I know her, I whispered. Adrian studied me carefully. From where? I closed my eyes, hoping another memory would surface. At first there was only silence. Then came the faintest impression of sunlight pouring through enormous museum windows, the scent of old paper and polished wood, and a woman's gentle voice telling 2 little girls to stay close because beautiful things were easy to lose. My eyes opened immediately. I remember her voice, I said quietly. Not her name. Just her voice. Adrian nodded slowly. Memory rarely returns all at once. He enlarged the image until the woman's face filled the monitor. Near her collar rested a small gold pin shaped like an iris flower. Adrian leaned closer. That pin is familiar. He opened another digital archive connected to his family's historical foundation. Hundreds of gala photographs appeared across the screen. We searched silently for several minutes until one image stopped both of us. The same iris pin gleamed beneath ballroom lights taken nearly 15 years earlier. The woman stood beside an older gentleman wearing the emerald signet ring we had already identified. Beneath the photograph appeared a caption. Eleanor Ashcroft. Director of Cultural Affairs. My heartbeat quickened. Ashcroft, I repeated. The museum where I work carries that name. Adrian continued reading. She served on the advisory board for both the Ashcroft Museum and the Romano Cultural Trust for more than 20 years. I looked back at the childhood photograph lying on the table. She knew my family. Better than that, Adrian answered. She helped organize the exhibition where this photograph was taken. The room fell silent again as every scattered clue slowly began connecting into a pattern. Eleanor had been present during my childhood. She had appeared beside my mother. She had watched me during the gala. She had followed me throughout the evening without speaking. None of it felt accidental anymore. Before either of us could continue, another notification appeared on Adrian's computer. One of his investigators had completed a search requested only an hour earlier. A scanned visitor registry from the museum exhibition had finally been recovered from an off-site archive. Adrian opened the file. My name appeared exactly where we expected. Claire Bennett. Age 4. Beneath it appeared another entry. Lily Bennett. Age 4. My hands instinctively covered my mouth. The second little girl had a name. Lily. I whispered it aloud, testing the sound as though it belonged to someone I had loved long ago. Something shifted inside me the instant I said it. A flash of memory returned without warning. 2 little girls laughing beneath enormous marble columns. Small hands reaching for the same silk scarf. A promise spoken between children that they would never let go of each other. The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only tears I had not realized were falling. Adrian quietly placed a clean handkerchief beside me without interrupting my thoughts. It was such a simple gesture that it steadied me more than any reassuring words could have. Then his phone rang. He listened for only a few seconds before his expression became unusually guarded. After ending the call, he looked directly at me. Eleanor Ashcroft has requested a private meeting. He paused before adding the one detail that changed everything once again. She specifically asked that you come alone. The request should have frightened me. Instead, it felt inevitable. Ever since the lights failed at the gala, every answer had pulled me toward Eleanor Ashcroft as though an invisible thread had been waiting more than 2 decades to tighten. Adrian read the message one final time before placing his phone on the table. She selected the location as well, he said. The original Ashcroft Museum. I looked toward the rain-covered windows. The same museum where the photograph was taken. He nodded once. Exactly. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. Somewhere between the anonymous letters, forgotten photographs, and impossible discoveries, our conversations had stopped feeling like an interrogation. They had become something quieter. 2 people searching for the same truth from different directions. She asked me to come alone, I finally said. Adrian folded his hands calmly. That is what the message says. I searched his expression, expecting disagreement. Instead, he surprised me again. The decision is yours. I blinked. You are not going to tell me not to go? No. His answer came without hesitation. Because if someone had spent 23 years hiding part of my life, I would walk through that door as well. His honesty settled something inside me that I had not realized was still shaking. Trust did not appear all at once. It arrived quietly, built from moments exactly like this. Moments where someone respected your choice even when they feared the outcome. We left the estate just after sunrise. The storm had finally passed, leaving New York washed clean beneath a pale blue sky. Morning traffic flowed steadily through the streets while coffee shops filled with people beginning perfectly ordinary days. I envied them for a brief moment. 24 hours earlier I had been one of them. Someone whose greatest concern involved museum budgets and restoration deadlines. Now every familiar landmark seemed to belong to someone else's life. The Ashcroft Museum stood almost empty when we arrived. Closed to the public for a private board meeting, according to the notice hanging beside the entrance. Adrian parked across the street instead of directly outside. I promised I would let you choose, he said. I intend to keep that promise. I looked toward the museum doors before turning back to him. You are staying here? He smiled faintly. Close enough to keep my word if you decide you need me. Far enough away to honor hers. I thanked him with nothing more than a quiet nod because words suddenly felt too small. As I crossed the sidewalk alone, the marble steps beneath my feet stirred another faint memory. 2 little girls counting each step together. 1, 2, 3. Whoever reached the top first had to wait for the other. The memory disappeared before I reached the entrance, leaving only the echo of childish laughter. Inside, the museum felt strangely peaceful without visitors. Sunlight filtered through the enormous skylight, illuminating sculptures and paintings that had always made me feel at home. Today they watched in silence like patient witnesses. Eleanor Ashcroft stood waiting beneath the grand staircase wearing a simple navy suit instead of the silver gown from the gala. Her calm smile carried none of the confidence I remembered from the photographs. It carried regret. She looked at me for a long moment before quietly saying the words I had unknowingly waited my entire life to hear. Claire, I have owed you the truth since the day your sister disappeared. For several seconds I could not answer. The museum around us disappeared until only Eleanor's words remained. Your sister disappeared. I had spent my entire life believing I was an only child. Now the truth stood only a few feet away, spoken so quietly it felt almost sacred. Eleanor slowly gestured toward a private gallery that had not yet opened to the public. We walked together beneath tall ceilings where morning light filtered through stained glass, painting soft colors across the marble floor. She stopped beside an empty display pedestal. The original silk scarf was never valuable because of the fabric, she said. It was valuable because of the promise attached to it. I frowned. What promise? Eleanor looked down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. Your mother and Adrian's father were partners in establishing a cultural trust that protected family collections from being sold or scattered. They believed history belonged to everyone, not only to wealthy families. The scarf became a symbol of that agreement. I struggled to follow the connection. Then why erase my family? Her shoulders lowered with visible regret. Because someone inside the trust believed influence was worth more than integrity. Documents vanished. Records were rewritten. Your parents refused to cooperate. I remembered Adrian's words from the night before. Someone wants us looking in the wrong direction. Eleanor reached into a small leather portfolio and carefully removed another photograph. This one showed my parents standing beside a younger man I immediately recognized from Adrian's family archive. The emerald signet ring rested on his hand exactly as it had appeared in the security reflection. His name is Victor Romano, Eleanor said softly. He was Adrian's older cousin. My heartbeat quickened. Was? He resigned from every public position years ago after disagreements inside the family, but he never truly left their world. I looked closer at the photograph. Victor appeared friendly, almost ordinary. Nothing about his smile suggested decades of secrets. Eleanor continued before I could ask another question. Your parents discovered financial records proving that priceless historical artifacts were quietly being replaced with replicas while originals disappeared into private collections. They intended to expose everything. The empty pedestal beside us suddenly seemed symbolic. A missing artifact. A missing truth. A missing childhood. What happened to Lily? I whispered. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Your parents believed separating the two of you would keep at least one daughter safe while they gathered enough evidence to reveal the truth. They trusted the wrong people to help them. Tears blurred my vision again, but this time they were mixed with something else. Not only grief. Determination. 23 years had been stolen from my sister and me because someone believed history could simply be rewritten. Does Adrian know this? I asked. Eleanor nodded slowly. Not yet. But he deserves to. Before I could respond, the heavy wooden doors at the far end of the gallery opened. Adrian entered alone, his expression calm but alert. He had clearly respected my decision to meet Eleanor without interruption until the moment she quietly invited him inside. His eyes moved from me to the photographs resting on the table. Eleanor drew a slow breath before speaking. "Adrian, everything you have been searching for does not begin with Claire. It begins with someone carrying your own family name." I watched his expression remain perfectly composed, but I recognized the subtle change in his eyes. The truth had finally crossed the one line neither of us could ignore. It was no longer my past alone. It had become his as well. Adrian did not interrupt Eleanor. He listened without defending his family, without searching for excuses that might soften the weight of what she had revealed. That quiet restraint told me more about his character than any speech ever could. Eleanor placed several sealed folders across the long oak table. "These are copies," she said. "The originals have been stored in 3 separate locations. If anything happens to one archive, the others remain." Adrian opened the first folder with careful precision. Inside were financial ledgers, acquisition records, and handwritten correspondence stretching back more than 2 decades. Every page pointed toward the same pattern. Authentic historical pieces had quietly disappeared while nearly identical replicas replaced them in public collections. The profits had traveled through charitable organizations before vanishing into private accounts controlled by shell companies. Adrian turned another page before stopping completely. His expression remained calm, but I noticed his fingers tighten ever so slightly against the paper. A familiar signature appeared at the bottom of multiple transactions. Victor Romano. The name no longer belonged to an old family photograph. It belonged to evidence. "He used our family's reputation as a shield," Adrian said softly. Eleanor nodded. "Most people trusted the Romano name without question. That trust became the perfect disguise." I looked around the gallery where priceless paintings surrounded us in silent elegance. For the first time I understood why history mattered so much. Every object represented truth carried safely across generations. Replace enough truth with convincing copies, and eventually no one remembers what was real. My parents had tried to prevent exactly that. "There is something else," Eleanor said. She removed one final envelope from her portfolio and handed it directly to me. The handwriting on the front belonged to my mother. I recognized it instantly from birthday cards I had kept in a small box at home. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Claire, if you are reading this, then the promise we made could no longer protect both of you. Please never believe that silence meant abandonment. Every choice your father and I made came from love, even when it looked like loss. One day the truth will find you because truth has more patience than fear. Take care of your sister if life gives you that chance again." I could not continue reading for several moments. Tears blurred the final lines until Adrian quietly offered me the same handkerchief he had carried since the first night. This time I accepted it without hesitation. Not because I needed comfort alone, but because somewhere along this impossible journey, accepting help no longer felt like surrender. Eleanor gently closed the remaining folders. "Everything necessary to restore your family's name now exists in these documents." Adrian carefully gathered each file into a single case before looking toward me. "The accusation against you will be withdrawn before the day ends." I shook my head slowly. "That matters less now." He looked surprised. "Why?" I folded my mother's letter and held it close. "Because clearing my name is only the beginning. My parents lost their voices protecting something larger than themselves. I will not allow their story to disappear again." Adrian held my gaze for a long moment before giving a single respectful nod. It was not the nod of a powerful man giving permission. It was the nod of an equal standing beside another. As morning sunlight filled the gallery, I realized the greatest discovery was no longer hidden inside museum archives or forgotten photographs. It was the simple truth that neither of us had to carry the weight of the past alone. 1 year later, the city looked exactly the same, yet nothing inside me remained unchanged. Morning sunlight poured through the restored glass ceiling of the Ashcroft Museum, illuminating a new exhibition dedicated to preserving the true history behind every recovered artifact. Visitors wandered quietly from gallery to gallery, reading stories that had almost been erased forever. The original embroidered silk scarf rested inside a climate-controlled display at the center of the room. Beside it hung a simple plaque honoring the historians, conservators, and families who had protected truth even when no one believed them. My parents' names appeared there. So did Eleanor Ashcroft's. The accusations against me had long since disappeared, replaced by public apologies and restored records. The cultural trust had been rebuilt under completely transparent leadership, and every recovered artifact had been returned to its rightful collection. Victor Romano had vanished from public life before the investigation concluded, leaving behind only documents that revealed how easily ambition could disguise itself as respectability. History had finally corrected itself without needing revenge to do it. I often thought about Lily. The search continued with renewed hope, supported by every document we had uncovered, every forgotten archive we had reopened, and every person who refused to let another memory disappear. I no longer searched because I felt incomplete. I searched because promises deserved to be kept, even across decades. The museum doors opened again, and a familiar figure stepped quietly inside. Adrian Romano wore a dark navy suit without the usual security surrounding him. No assistants followed. No one hurried ahead to announce his arrival. He walked through the galleries the way every visitor did, pausing before paintings, reading descriptions, allowing history to speak for itself. When he finally reached the silk scarf, he smiled almost imperceptibly before turning toward me. "It belongs here," he said. "It always did," I answered. We stood together in comfortable silence while children wandered past the display, asking their parents curious questions about old fabrics, forgotten families, and why stories mattered. Their laughter echoed gently beneath the high ceilings, replacing memories that had once carried only uncertainty. Adrian looked around the gallery before quietly saying, "Power can protect buildings. It cannot protect truth unless someone chooses honesty first." I smiled because the man standing beside me no longer sounded like someone defined by influence or family legacy. He sounded like someone who had finally chosen the person he wanted to become. "My mother wrote that truth has more patience than fear," I said. She was right. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. "And you proved it." Before leaving, he reached into his coat pocket and carefully placed a small envelope beside the visitor book. Inside rested the museum admission ticket from 23 years earlier, now professionally restored beneath clear archival paper. Across the back, beneath my mother's faded handwriting, another sentence had been added in fresh ink. "History survives because ordinary people refuse to let extraordinary lies become permanent." I watched him walk toward the museum entrance until sunlight surrounded him beyond the glass doors. He never looked back because he did not have to. Some journeys end with grand declarations. Ours ended with something quieter. Respect earned through truth. Hope strengthened by memory. And the understanding that silk may wrinkle, photographs may fade, and names may be forgotten for a time, but kindness leaves a mark that no one can erase, because in the end, the strongest legacy is never power. It is the courage to protect what is true.